This week on Quadriga, Liberating Libya, the failed intervention. This major fuel depot was set ablaze as rival militias fought for control of Tripoli's international airport. The fighting in Tripoli has been going on for weeks and has turned the south of the capital into a battlefield. The situation has been deemed so unstable that the U.S. has evacuated its embassy staff and suspended diplomatic ties. Germany and many other countries have followed suit. In the 3 years since the Western intervention helped depose Libya's former strongman Moammar Gadhafi, the country's fledgling leadership has not managed to disarm the rival militias. Now, only days before the recently elected parliament is set to get to work, Libya is on the verge of becoming a failed state. Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of Quadriga. The international community associated and attached great hopes to the future of Libya after the overthrow of Moammar Gadhafi. But unfortunately, it did not turn out to be that way. Not yet, anyway. So the question is, what went wrong in Libya? And perhaps more importantly, how to fix it, how to bring Libya back on the right track. That's what I want to talk about on today's show, together with these three individuals. Welcome to Malik El-Bakouri, is an orthopedic surgeon from Tripoli and an activist in defending physicians' rights and in improving the health system in his home country, Libya. Daniel Gerlach is the editor-in-chief of Zenit, a German-language magazine on the Middle East, Africa and the Muslim world. He last visited Libya shortly before the parliamentary elections in June. And Stefano Casertano is a political journalist and author. He is currently serving as a Berlin correspondent for the Italian newspaper Pagina 99 and has published widely on energy policy in North Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Let's get right to it, Malik El-Bakouri. Before we get into the details as to what actually went wrong in Libya, you were just recently there in June.
Right.
Tell us, what's the situation there?
The situation now in Libya is very difficult. There is a lot of violence. The violence is escalating in Libya. Now, the current situation in the past few weeks, we can say that there is no water. There is a shortage of electricity. All gas stations, especially in Tripoli, are closed, and the security situation is very difficult inside Tripoli and also in the other city, Benghazi. Yeah.
I think the problem seems to be that no one is really in control of the country. Isn't that the case? After the overthrow of Gadhafi, they've had 5 governments since 2011, and right now the country seems to be ruled more or less, for the lack of a better term, by up to 1,700 militia groups.
This is right. This is absolutely right. The situation in Libya, that the government is very weak, and they are only issuing reports, and they are advising people not to go to the clashing areas and the violence areas, and the situation is ruled by militias. This is the situation, yeah.
Daniel Gerlach, Moammar Gadhafi, strong man of Libya, ruled the country since 1969. He ruled the country for 42 years. Now, isn't it normal, one would argue, that there is no tradition and no understanding of democracy in Libya?
Well, if it was only for the democracy, I think we could cope with the situation. The problem here is there is no understanding of a state, and Libyans say that, candidly. Gaddafi's rule was kind of replacing state-like structures, and what we have now in Libya is that people have no respect for the institutions of the state if they are there. Which I find quite fascinating too, because the great magic of Libya, on the other hand, is that people, due to a very intact and good social fabric and good social structures, they managed to live in this country, and they managed to maintain a certain kind of order and security in the total absence of a state. So I don't think, for me as an Orientalist and as somebody who's studying the Middle East, it was fascinating to see how people got on and they managed, and even they took care of their own security. But of course, in the last couple of months, due to a few very structural failures and mistakes, the situation escalated, and we see also how vulnerable this absence of a state can be.
As I said, 5 governments since 2011. The country still has no constitution. You were in Libya shortly before the parliamentary elections in June. They were held, yet they didn't bring any stability yet, the outcome of this government, this election.
No, the last election was neglected by the Libyans themselves because they said, we don't know the people we are voting for. The Libyans were very frustrated and disappointed of the performance of the parliamentary assembly, which was there before the National Congress, and they saw that an election doesn't bring democracy, an election doesn't bring freedom, and that not only a government but also some kind of a national Congress can behave like a dictator, because it can kind of disenfranchise the people, and it can take all the power and in the end not well manage this power. So I think the elections are not the issue here. On the other hand, this is another paradox of Libya. The Constitutional Assembly is working quietly and very efficiently. They are very professional people. They are people that take their work very seriously. So on the one hand, you have good news coming out of Libya. You have a high level of self-sustainability and engagement, and a lot of Libyans coming from America, from Europe, from abroad to invest in their country, and they're ready to assume responsibility. This is the paradox. On the one hand, it's the downside, but on the other hand, there is like a big potential in this country too.
Well, the potential, hopefully, Libya will live up to at some point in the future. But right now, sadly, it seems to be engaged in anarchy and chaos. As we said, Stefano Casertano, up to 1,700 militia groups, all of them divided by ideology, by region, by geography. It's very hard to keep the oversight here, isn't it?
It's, we must decide here, try to understand here, I guess, if Libya is a failed state already or not, if this looks like Somalia or not. Because I would say, academically speaking, this is a typical situation. In a democracy, in a state which is not fully established, you remove the dictator. The normal tendency is not the one towards democracy, but the one towards warlordism, towards Praetorianism. On top of that, Libya's got the problem of oil and gas. This can be a factor for stability in some cases. In some other cases, this is a factor for anarchy. Groups want to seize the centers of control for the oil riches. And then the competition between these groups becomes even more violent. Especially if you have offshore oil rigs, so in the water, these rigs that extract minerals, hydrocarbons. The goal is to seize the capital. If you have oil onshore, so in the territory, the goal is to seize the region. In Libya, you have both. So this is a big problem for the country.
And you've asked already the question, which I will direct in a little while to Malik. Is Libya already a failed state? What is it? Is it a failed state?
If we must make this judgment basing on what we heard, the amount of militias and the ability of the government to control the territory and the status of the infrastructure, the supplies for the population, I am afraid I have to start thinking that Libya is already a country in a state of anarchy.
Malik al-Bakouri, I get a sense you don't necessarily agree.
I don't think so. The situation in Libya, when we think about what happened in the last 3 years, it's normal what's happening now. There was an international intervention since 3 years now, and there was more than 20,000 airstrikes against Libyan army and Libyan defense and Gaddafi army, which is the Libyan army. Now, I think the Libyan people think that the international society gave Libya and a very rich country in a silver plate to armed groups and non-trained armed groups, also to an extreme political groups that they are now ruling Libya. we have a hope that the last elections, this is our last hope, that the next gathering in the 3rd of August will do something or will make something in the future in Libya. But I can say that the situation is difficult, but a failed state, this is not the exact word.
What went wrong? We've talked about the potential that Libya has. A lot of educated people in the country. And after the fall of Moammar Gadhafi, a lot of people said, Libya is going to be a regional player. Libya is looking at a bright future. Obviously, it didn't turn out to be that way. In your view, what went wrong?
What went wrong? Since 3 years, Libyan people had so much hope that we will have a better future, a very good future for our children. But this is not what happened. Libyan militias are fighting each other now. Different political groups are fighting each other with an international intervention also. There is a support from neighboring country to certain militias. And the thing here that there is a fight over money and power in Libya now.
It's true, there is a fight over money and power, but there is also a mentality here which looks at the country or at the nation as a spoil of the revolution. And every part, every region and every militia which represents different regions is trying to get its share. So, you know, the people in Benghazi said, we started the revolution. Without us, this revolution would never have, begun. The Zintani say, we conquered Tripoli, so we are the ones that should have the spoils of this revolution. And the people from Misrata say, okay, if we hadn't kept up the resistance, you know, the revolution would have suffocated at a very early stage. So, on the other hand, you have the provinces of Libya where no revolution ever took place because there are, tribal areas or, areas which remained loyal to Gaddafi. So these people all of a sudden are being blamed, and they're looked down upon by other people, by those that, the architects of the revolution, saying, you guys, you better shut up because you have no merit in this revolution, so you have no part in the political process. I think this is a very important issue to address, and this is not the fault of the militias alone. It's also, a mentality. People blame it now all on Gaddafi. They say, Gaddafi, he divided us, and he introduced tribalism to Libya, and he did not want us to become allies and friends and federalists whatsoever. But I think, it's important to understand that this is not only a question of failed state or not failed state, of East and West or of militias, but also a deeply entrenched mentality in the country.
I think you're right. I would say Gaddafi was not the one that introduced tribalism to Libya. He was perceiving a couple of years before the revolution that something was changing. So he implemented a program of empowering autonomies. They were called the revolutionary councils, some sort of Soviets which represent issues of tribes and so on. Give them a voice in the parliament. There were some elections and something like that. It was perceived that he was losing his grip on the country. Just to give you an example, it's not by chance that in 2010, I guess, Gaddafi was invited to Rome to give some speeches by the Italian government. And we remember how Berlusconi tried to introduce, to foster his relationship with Libya. It was a marketing show for Gaddafi, for his domestic purposes. He was losing the grip on the different issues of all the groups that wanted to have a say in the way the country was ruled.
Actually, till now, Gaddafi, there's many tribes are still supporting Gaddafi in Libya. There's two large tribes in Libya are supporting Gaddafi, like Werfalla and Wershafana tribe, and also many tribes in the south. The other thing that you are talking about, a mentality. We are talking about what started the violence in Libya since weeks now. What started violence in Libya is, you can think that after the 25th of June, the election, that violence started 2 or 3 days after the elections. this violence and this problem is due to a political purpose. The Islamic groups and the militias which are supporting Islamic groups, they lost the election. Clearly, they lost the election. And they started this violence to protect their future plans in Libya. And also, you can think that the violence started in Tripoli between Zintan and some militias from Misrata, 3 or 4 militias in Misrata. Zintan are staying in the airport since 3 years. Why now Misrata militias or Islamic militias are doing this at this particular time?
So it's an orchestrated effort on the part of Islamist groups to
trying to
regain
protect their rule in the future Libya. This is what's happening in Libya now. There was a very organized operation. The name of the operation is a lion operation. This is Kaswara in Arabic. And there is a political a political party which called in Arabic Ghurfatura Libya, and this is supported by these militias. So this is what's happening here in Tripoli. Also in Benghazi, there's clashes between Libyan army led by Haftar and a Saika group, and between an extreme militia, extreme Islamic militia, which is Ansar Sharia.
And,
this
and
is what's happening.
For those you've mentioned a couple of names. For those who don't know, General Khalifa Haftar, of course, leads the Libyan National Army. He was a colonel under Gaddafi, turned against him in the end and led to his overthrow. His main objective is to find the very same Islamist that you mentioned. So it gets a bit confusing here, perhaps, to some of the viewers. Daniel Gerlach, if you were to put it in a nutshell about what this conflict is about, the current outbreak of violence in Libya, what is it about, really?
Well, I think Stefano is right to the extent that resources and the struggle for resources, the struggle for control of these resources is important here. But this is like one layer of the conflict. I think the clashes between Islamist militias and, let's say, Islamist parties even, and seculars is one layer of the conflict. The clash between self-declared federalists who believe, in independence or autonomy of the provinces, and those that prone a national state, is one layer of the conflict. But there is a very, very important, I think, aspect here, which is the interest of outside powers, like regional powers. I'm not necessarily talking about Europe, the West. I'm talking about Libya's neighbors. I'm talking about the Gulf states, because Libya has turned in the, let's say, in the narrative of some Arab media and into something like an endgame scenario for the fight between Islamism and, let's say, the national authoritarian military state, as we witness at the moment in Egypt. So for the Muslim Brotherhood movement in the region, Libya is like kind of the last hope at the moment, because they've been ousted from almost any country where they won parliamentary elections. They have lost their power bases in many Arab countries, and we see a large influx of Muslim brothers and of jihadists, which is not the same, but sometimes can be allied, from Egypt, from other Arab countries. We even see a reflux of jihadi fighters from Syria to the east of Libya. So Libya is somehow, also falling victim to these, scenarios of, power struggles in the entire region. But one important thing, I think Libyans should be very careful not to see themselves as victims of, geopolitics and to blame the others, because the blaming game, I know Gaddafi, I know the neighbors did a lot of very bad things to this country, but Libyans have to take it in their own hands now and not believe that they are just, victims of external power struggles. This is a very dangerous situation, because when you victimize yourself, you lose control completely.
But I disagree with this opinion, because you cannot say that you people take your own responsibility, and you must do this and you must do that. The international community and the international society must support Libyans by any means, by political and military means, I can say that, because since 3 years there is no democratic base in Libya, there is no democratic experience in Libya also. You cannot say to these peoples are a mixture of political backgrounds that you have now by your own, you must do and establish a state. This is very, very difficult. You can see the situation, what was the situation in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Somalia. We will have, for example, Iraq. There was a war between America and Saddam, and after that, America supported the Iraqi regime for many years to come. Libya is now standing alone against corruption, against violence, against chaos, and you are asking Libyans to establish a state from scratch.
But do you really think the Western countries should have sent troops, boots on the ground in Libya, and stay there?
I cannot say that, but some sort of, for example, the next parliament is gathering, is planned to gather on the 3rd or 4th of August. Maybe the United Nations must protect this gathering, because there's Libyan people they know that some militias, they will not let this parliament gather. This is, for example, this is very easy to do.
So the campaign to oust Moammar Gadhafi was indeed led mostly by Great Britain and France, with the US leading from behind. So if I understand you correctly, you're very disappointed. You're very disappointed in these countries that they only were focused on the ouster of Moammar Gadhafi, but not on the reconstruction of the state of Libya. Do I understand you correctly?
Yeah, this is right. This is absolutely right. All the people, Libyan people, are thinking like that the international society led an intervention against Gaddafi, and then what we can say that the political, they are dealing with Libya in some sort of a naive political
I don't agree. I'm sorry I have to interfere. In 2012, you could see people rejoicing on the streets of Libya. It was consensus in the country that, it was right for the Western alliance to leave, not to interfere, not to engage in Libyan politics. The country was positive. The power was transferred from the NTC to the National Congress. Everybody was fine. 2012 was a country where Libya was full of hope. Many Libyans returned to the country. There was no question of whatever the West or the international community guiding the political process in Libya. Libyans felt strong enough to do this themselves. Then a subsequent, a sequence of mistakes have been made. And
by whom?
Well, in the end, by everybody. Of course, you can accuse the Americans, saying like, okay, if you had saved Prime Minister Zaidan when he was in an existential fight with the East, with the oil strikers, that kept the oil exports down, and Zaidan was engaging in a very heads-on struggle with these people, and then they illegally exported their own oil. They made him look like an idiot. They made him look like a fool with no power in his hand. He was not even the commander-in-chief, though he was the prime minister of the country. Of course, he called the Americans at that time and said, like, I need your help. I need your troops. I need you to stop this tanker, the Morning Glory affair. The Americans didn't do that because maybe Zaidan had lost their trust. They didn't believe in his competence or whatever, or they just didn't know what to do, so they did nothing. So there were a few points where things could have changed, and the state authority could have maintained, but I don't think it was the West's role to guide and develop a political process in Libya.
This is not a matter of persons, Zaidan or some other prime minister. I'm talking about this naive diplomacy. There is more than 1,700 militias. Some of them are criminals. Some of them are extreme Islamic groups, and you're asking government and Libyan, which Libyans they have no experience in these things, and you're asking Libyans to establish a country to stood against these well-organized Islamic groups. Some of these Islamic groups like Ansar Sharia and the other Islamic groups, they have a lot of experience and they are well organized. You can see on internet and YouTube that they are making high quality videos of their operations, and they have a spokesman on other things. So some of them were in Afghanistan, some of them were in Pakistan, some of them were 10 years or more in Gaddafi's prisons, and they are well organized. And there's a shadow government. They are ruled by these personnel. You cannot ask Libyan people and the Libyan government to stand against all of these things.
Stefano Casertano, clearly we have a difference of opinion here. Malik El-Bakouri seems to think that the Western powers should have aided Libya after the overthrow of Gaddafi, whereas Daniel Yelach is saying, well, you know, at some point it was up to you. What's your take?
I think that the conflict, as Malik stated, started because the Islamic groups did not accept the result of the elections. So that's why this period of violence started.
But even before, after the concerted effort on the part of Great Britain and France to oust Moammar Gadhafi, and they probably thought, job done, we're going back home. Exactly. Maybe should they have stayed?
Then Egypt happened. What I'm saying is that after the takeover of al-Sisi in Egypt, what happened to the Muslim Brotherhood? Ousted, jailed, killed, tortured, everything possible. And the Islamists in Libya are afraid this is going to happen to them as well.
Exactly.
So this is a fight, not for power, but for survival. They know that if they don't oppose the secularists, the parties, and also the party that actually won the election by a wide margin, this is what's going to happen to them. So I think in terms of international intervention, of course, you're right, Daniel. We thought job done. Also the West thought job done. If we look at the reports published also by the US Army, they were saying this is a model operation. Very few human expenses, I guess none. Short, effective. This worked. This is a model we have to introduce, and Obama actually nailed it, so we have it. Now, a couple of years later, we found out this didn't work at all. So if we have to face reality the way it is, this is a very dangerous conflict on a regional level, because this is Arabism opposed to Islamism, with spillover of ideology and weapons and violence to all the Sahel region, the south of Libya, south of North Africa. And if we don't stop this, all the region is going to collapse. So the question is now, do we need a new international intervention, and how?
And indeed, this is a very dangerous conflict, as was pointed out correctly by Stefano Casertano, because not only, but certainly also due to its spillover effects. This is not only a conflict contained to the country of Libya. Let's have a quick look.
The violence and discord in Libya is approaching the point at which its internal problems could very well start triggering significant geopolitical crises. Libya has the third largest oil reserves in all of Africa. Even during the latest violence, Libyan wells have been pumping out some 500,000 barrels a day, but global oil markets react sensitively to any instability that threatens supply. A failed Libya could also affect regional stability. The country could become a hub for Islamist extremists, which experts fear could further destabilise neighbouring countries. Starting in Libya, looking east, a full half of the southern Mediterranean coastline is at best unstable or embroiled in violent conflict like in Israel or Syria. Illegal immigration is also a key issue, particularly for Europe. Human traffickers are already using Libya as a hub to smuggle people and contraband to the EU. This could be compounded by a refugee crisis should Libya descend back into war.
Well, Malik al-Bakouri, we just saw the situation there, the spillover effects. And before we get into the geopolitical ramifications, let's talk about the humanitarian aspect, the humanitarian crisis that has sprung out of this conflict.
Yeah, this is very important now. In the last few weeks, there is a disaster. There's a huge problem inside the capital, Tripoli. Actually, there's more than 2.5 million people in Tripoli. There's no electricity, there's no water, all gas stations are closed. Also in hospitals, the situation is very, very difficult. More than 3,000 nurses from the medical staff from Philippines are evacuated from Libya, which is more than 70% of the medical and nursing personnel in hospitals in Libya. Also, there is a shortage of doctors in Libyan hospitals, and this is very difficult, very difficult. More than 27,000 Libyan people fled in the last 2 or 3 days from the Libyan-Tunisian borders. There's some news that saying that the Libyan-Tunisian borders are closed, and the situation is very difficult. Also from the security side, there's a lot of kidnapping. There's a political activist and a blogger, which is Mr. Banoun, who was kidnapped since 1 week, and no one knows where he is now. Also, there's a lot of assassinations. We can say that in the last 5 or 6 months, more than 350 to 400 are assassinated in Benghazi and Tripoli. Until now, every day there's assassinations are going on.
You know, but this is exactly the reason why I strongly disagree with your narrative that the violence in an orchestrated manner had just started just after the election. It's gradual. We see we have achieved a different stage of escalation now, but this crude violence, targeted assassinations, and so on, started long ago, and it increased and increased to a terrible extent. If you look back like 1 year, 1.5 years ago, assassinations were something, you know, and killing was something that happened. If we consider the fact that there are so many weapons and so many militias in Libya, rather not very frequently, because, you know, people were afraid. There is a price you pay for killing somebody from the opposing militia. But these targeted assassinations is something that you know, we witnessed increasingly in the last couple of months. And I think, you know, the current state of escalation is not only due to the loss of the election. I think it's you know,
actually
there's a decay in manners also.
I disagree. These political assassinations are an extension to the current violence here in Tripoli and Benghazi. When you see that more than 600 personnel were assassinated from the Libyan army.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the assassinations, most of them are from the Libyan army and national political activists, like Mrs. Bougaygis, she was a political and activist and a human rights lawyer. She was assassinated 1 month ago, I think. These assassinations are an extension for this violence. This is a political assassinations. And many Libyan people blame the extremist Islamic groups for these assassinations.
Despite all these horrific news coming out of Libya these days, Malik, what gives you hope?
Actually,
what gives you hope as far as the future of your country is concerned?
The situation is horrific, as you said, but our last hope is the next gathering of the new parliament on the 4th of August. Also, we have hope that some powerful third party will intervene, and
who would you like to intervene?
That we can say that the international society, the United Nations. Libya is established and in the 1951, established by the United Nations. So we hope that the United Nations will support Libyan people.
Stefano Casertano, do you think that scenario will play out as hoped?
I agree with your pessimism. sorry to say, I'm not confident about the fact that the UN might intervene. They are too busy at the moment. They should intervene in Syria, in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Libya. And soon they have to intervene also somewhere else.
So what's the worst case scenario then? Is Libya going to fall apart? Is it?
I can quote some sources by the Italian intelligence that have been reported in the last weeks. You know that Libya supplies 10% of the Italian natural gas, plus there is a huge presence of Italian energy companies in Libya. They claim that in 6 months we have to find alternate supply sources because the situation is not going to be under control anymore. The main Italian oil company, Eni, evacuated the non-essential personnel from the onshore facilities. They are now on the offshore platforms in front of Libya. The Italian ambassador is still in Tripoli because there is 800 Italian expats in the capital, so he wants to stay there, but they're ready to leave. So what experts in Italy say is that the situation is not recoverable. Of course, you normally trust the intelligence, not for scenarios, more for facts, for at least Italian intelligence. In this case, people are starting to believe in it.
Tanya Gelach, if the indication, if the behavior on the part of diplomatic personnel, foreign diplomatic personnel, is any indication, it indeed doesn't look very good, because it's not just the Italians, the Germans have recalled their personnel, the French, the Brits.
Yeah. The Americans too.
The Americans anyway, they of course have a very traumatic experience with Benghazi when Ambassador Christopher Stevens was killed. Do you have any words of hope for the nation of Libya? Do you think that things, or will things get worse before they get better?
The question is, what do you hope for? Do you hope for to prevent the disintegration of the country, Libya to be split off? I don't think this would be the end of the world. I don't think it's wise to do so for such a small country with such tremendous resources, but this could happen.
What could temporarily look like?
Well, Libya can explode into many pieces, but I think the most let's say logical scenario would be a division between East and West, which has some historical
I don't think so.
There's some historical examples, but that's not the problem of the country.
I don't think so. This is absolutely not going to happen. Why? Because there is a mixture of tribes and families and a strong relations between East and West. You cannot imagine that many tribes are split between West and East. There is a family relations between West and East, and I don't think it's going to happen in the near future.
But you're talking about allegiances to tribes, but what about a common sense of national identity, which usually keeps people together?
The common sense of national identity, it's there, but many people are having loyalty to their tribes more than to the country, unfortunately. The other thing that you are talking about international intervention, and it's not going to happen in the near future. There is a moral responsibility from the international society, from America, from Europe, toward Libya. And the other thing that the problem in Libya will affect the whole region. You can imagine if the Islamic groups ruled Libya. Libya is a very rich country. This will affect the whole region and also other countries. These Islamic parties will support terrorism all over the world. Libya is not like Afghanistan or Somalia. Libya is a very rich country. When these Islamic groups have money, this will be a very big problem to the whole region. You can imagine what's happening now in Mali. Mali, this is a very poor country, and there is a big problem in the whole region. You can imagine with this amount of money is in the hands of extreme Islamic groups. This is a very big problem.
You're absolutely right. But there was a moment a couple of months ago when you could really see that the militant, the violent Islamist groups like Ansar Sharia and the, let's say, Muslim Brother affiliated groups were disagreeing. They were kind of splitting. There was a lot of, cacophonia among the Islamist groups in Libya. Then Khalifa Haftar arrived, this, dubious officer, self-declared head of the new Libyan army who took revenge, who launched Operation Karama, and he said, like, I will stop the killing of Libyan army officers. He gained a lot of sympathy. People believed in an Egyptian military solution in Libya, like an Egyptian-style solution.
But even
then
he
everybody
seems to be on the run.
Everybody was frustrated because
Benghazi as well.
And what happened is, like, due to the Haftar's operations, the Islamists reunited, and you could see the Grand Mufti of Libya, whatever important that person is, but you could hear him declare that the Ansar Sharia would die as martyrs on the battlefield, whereas the seculars who side with Haftar would die as infidels. This is something, and the international community was, I was very intrigued because I thought Haftar might be an option, might be a player that would get the support of the Americans, the British, all those that believe in stability as a prerogative. But in fact, what happened is it made the situation worse.
Stefano, are we underestimating the conflict in Libya in the international community, in the Western world?
Yes, if we allow a disintegration of Libya, we will create sanctuaries for radical Islam, and which we will also enjoy the possibility of having oil and gas rents. So this is something that cannot happen. And I think that the central state must gain back control of the territory. One
last word, Malek. What gives you hope after everything that's been said?
I have hope in the Libyan people, which were they have the revolution in 2011, and I hope everything will be right.
Well, let's hope that Libya will get on the right track. Thank you for a very enlightening discussion about Libya. Thank you out there for tuning in, and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.